The year was 1933, and the halls of German medical institutions hummed with an energy that would soon transform the global understanding of medicine forever. Germany stood as the undisputed leader in medical research, boasting universities and research facilities that attracted brilliant minds from across the continent. The nation's pharmaceutical industry had already revolutionized modern medicine with groundbreaking discoveries that would save millions of lives worldwide. Yet within these same corridors of healing, a darker transformation was beginning to take shape. German medical excellence had been centuries in the making. The country's universities had produced some of the most celebrated physicians and researchers in history, establishing traditions of rigorous scientific methodology that became the gold standard for medical education worldwide. Medical schools in Berlin, Munich, and other major cities attracted students from across Europe and beyond, eager to learn from the masters who had pioneered everything from surgical techniques to pharmaceutical innovations that were already changing the face of modern medicine. The German pharmaceutical industry had emerged as a global powerhouse by the early 20th century, with companies like IG Farben leading revolutionary advances in chemical research and drug development. These corporations had developed sulfonamides, the first widely effective antibacterial agents, which had already begun saving lives from previously fatal infections. The synthesis of these compounds represented a triumph of German chemical expertise, demonstrating the nation's capacity for translating basic scientific research into practical medical applications that could benefit humanity on a massive scale. Research institutions across Germany buzzed with activity as scientists pursued studies in aviation medicine, attempting to understand the physiological challenges faced by pilots flying at increasingly higher altitudes. These investigations into high-altitude physiology represented legitimate scientific inquiry, as aviation technology rapidly advanced and created new challenges for human survival in extreme environments. German researchers like Nathan Zuntz had already established the foundations of aviation medicine through careful physiological studies that would prove essential as aircraft capabilities expanded during the approaching conflict. The medical community in Germany operated within a framework of professional organizations and academic hierarchies that had developed over generations. Medical conferences brought together the nation's leading physicians to share research findings and discuss advances in treatment methodologies. These gatherings represented the pinnacle of scientific discourse, where new discoveries were presented and debated among peers who shared a commitment to advancing medical knowledge. The atmosphere at these conferences reflected the broader culture of German medical excellence, characterized by meticulous attention to detail and rigorous adherence to scientific principles. Blood research had become another area where German scientists were making significant contributions to medical knowledge. Understanding blood compatibility and developing methods for blood preservation represented crucial areas of investigation, particularly as medical professionals recognized the life-saving potential of blood transfusions during surgical procedures and trauma treatment. German researchers were exploring various methods for preserving blood plasma, investigating techniques that could extend the shelf life of this vital medical resource and make it more readily available during emergencies. The pharmaceutical research conducted by German companies extended far beyond basic drug development to encompass complex investigations into the treatment of infectious diseases. Scientists were working on compounds designed to combat typhus, scarlet fever, and other diseases that posed significant threats to public health. These research programs represented the kind of systematic approach to medical problem-solving that had made Germany a leader in pharmaceutical innovation, combining theoretical understanding with practical application to develop treatments that could save lives on a large scale. Medical education in Germany emphasized not only clinical skills, but also research methodology and scientific inquiry. Students learned to conduct experiments, analyze data, and draw conclusions based on empirical evidence rather than theoretical speculation alone. This educational approach had produced generations of physicians who were as comfortable in research laboratories as they were in clinical settings, creating a medical community that valued scientific advancement as much as patient care. The integration of research and clinical practice had become a hallmark of German medical education, setting it apart from medical training programs in other countries. The German medical establishment had also developed sophisticated networks for sharing research findings and coordinating collaborative studies across institutions. Medical journals published in German were read by physicians and researchers throughout Europe, disseminating new knowledge and establishing Germany as the center of medical innovation. These publication networks facilitated rapid communication of research findings, allowing discoveries made in one laboratory to quickly influence work being conducted in institutions across the country and beyond. Research into aviation medicine had become particularly important as military aviation expanded and pilots began flying at altitudes that presented serious physiological challenges. German researchers were investigating the effects of low oxygen levels, rapid altitude changes, and other environmental factors that could affect pilot performance and survival. These studies involved sophisticated equipment, including pressure chambers and centrifuges, designed to simulate the conditions pilots might encounter during high-altitude flight, representing cutting-edge research that would prove valuable for both military and civilian aviation applications. The culture of scientific collaboration within German medical institutions fostered an environment where researchers freely shared ideas and coordinated their investigations to maximize the impact of their work. Laboratory directors maintained correspondence with colleagues at other institutions, ensuring that research efforts were complementary rather than duplicative. This collaborative approach had accelerated the pace of medical discovery and had established Germany as the place where the most important advances in medical science were most likely to occur. German medical researchers had also begun investigating methods for treating wounds and infections more effectively, recognizing that traditional approaches to wound care were often inadequate for addressing the complex injuries that modern society was beginning to produce. Studies of tissue regeneration, bone healing, and infection control represented important areas of investigation that promised to improve treatment outcomes for patients suffering from traumatic injuries. These research programs combined basic scientific investigation with practical clinical applications, reflecting the German medical community's commitment to translating research findings into improved patient care. The international reputation of German medical research had attracted funding and support from various sources, enabling researchers to pursue ambitious projects that might not have been possible in other countries. Government agencies, private foundations, and commercial enterprises provided resources that supported everything from basic physiological research to the development of new pharmaceutical compounds. This financial support had created an environment where German medical researchers could pursue long-term investigations without the immediate pressure to produce commercially viable results, fostering the kind of fundamental research that often leads to breakthrough discoveries. Medical conferences held in German cities during this period attracted participants from across Europe and beyond, establishing these gatherings as premier forums for the exchange of scientific information. Researchers presented their latest findings to audiences of peers who could provide critical feedback and suggest new directions for investigation. The intellectual rigor of these conferences reflected the broader commitment to scientific excellence that characterized the German medical community, creating an environment where only the highest quality research was considered worthy of presentation to the international medical community. The systematic approach to medical research that had developed in Germany involved careful experimental design, meticulous data collection, and rigorous analysis of results. Researchers understood the importance of controlling variables and eliminating sources of bias that could compromise the validity of their findings. This methodological sophistication had enabled German scientists to make discoveries that were not only scientifically significant, but also reproducible by researchers working in other institutions, establishing the credibility of German medical research on an international scale. As political changes began to sweep across Germany in the early 1930s, the medical community initially remained focused on its research activities and clinical responsibilities. Physicians and researchers continued their investigations into aviation medicine, pharmaceutical development, and other areas of medical science, maintaining the traditions of excellence that had established Germany as the world leader in medical research. The dedication to scientific inquiry that characterized the German medical establishment seemed likely to continue producing the kind of breakthrough discoveries that had already transformed modern medicine and promised to benefit humanity for generations to come. The infrastructure supporting medical research in Germany had reached a level of sophistication that was unmatched elsewhere in the world. Laboratories were equipped with the most advanced instruments available. Libraries contained comprehensive collections of scientific literature, and research facilities provided environments where scientists could pursue their investigations with minimal external constraints. This infrastructure represented decades of investment in medical education and research, creating the physical and intellectual foundations necessary for sustained scientific advancement. German medical institutions had also developed sophisticated systems for training the next generation of medical researchers, ensuring that the traditions of scientific excellence would continue into the future. Graduate programs combined rigorous coursework with hands-on research experience, preparing students to become independent investigators capable of making their own contributions to medical knowledge. This educational approach had created a pipeline of talented researchers who were ready to carry forward the work begun by their mentors, maintaining Germany's position at the forefront of medical discovery. The atmosphere within German medical research communities during this period was characterized by optimism about the potential for scientific discovery to improve human health and alleviate suffering. Researchers believed that their work could lead to treatments for diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries, and they approached their investigations with the kind of enthusiasm that drives major scientific breakthroughs. This sense of purpose and possibility created an environment where ambitious research projects could flourish and where scientists were willing to pursue investigations that might not yield immediate results, but could ultimately transform medical practice. As 1933 drew to a close, the German medical establishment stood poised to continue its leadership role in global medical research. The foundations were firmly in place for continued scientific advancement. With world-class institutions, brilliant researchers, adequate funding, and a culture that valued excellence in both research and clinical practice. The stage was set for discoveries that could revolutionize medicine and benefit patients around the world. Yet the political changes sweeping across Germany would soon begin to influence the direction of medical research in ways that no one could have anticipated. The transformation that began to sweep through German medical institutions in 1934 represented one of history's most dramatic examples of how political ideology can fundamentally alter the direction of scientific research. What had been a medical establishment dedicated to healing and advancing human knowledge gradually evolved into something entirely different, as research priorities shifted to serve the needs of an increasingly militarized state, preparing for a conflict that would ultimately engulf the entire world. The early signs of change appeared subtle at first, manifesting as shifts in funding priorities and research emphasis rather than dramatic alterations in the day-to-day operations of medical institutions. Government agencies began expressing particular interest in research that could have military applications, encouraging investigations into aviation medicine, trauma treatment, and infectious disease control that could benefit military personnel. These requests seemed reasonable given the growing tensions in Europe and the obvious need to ensure that German military forces would have access to the best possible medical support. Medical researchers found themselves increasingly involved in studies designed to address specific military challenges. Aviation medicine became a particularly important area of investigation as the German Air Force expanded and pilots began flying more sophisticated aircraft at higher altitudes than ever before. Researchers conducted systematic studies of the physiological effects of high-altitude flight, investigating how reduced oxygen levels affected pilot performance and developing equipment and procedures that could enhance pilot survival and effectiveness in extreme conditions. The research infrastructure that had been developed to support civilian medical advancement proved readily adaptable to military applications. Pressure chambers, originally designed to study altitude effects on civilian populations, were modified to simulate the conditions that military pilots might encounter during combat operations. Centrifuges used to investigate the effects of acceleration on the human body became tools for understanding how fighter pilots could maintain consciousness during high-speed maneuvers that generated forces many times greater than normal gravity. Research into blood preservation and transfusion technology gained new urgency as military planners recognized that future conflicts would produce casualties requiring immediate access to blood products for survival. German scientists investigated methods for extending the shelf life of blood plasma and developing portable systems for blood transfusion that could be deployed in field conditions. These investigations built upon earlier research into blood compatibility and storage, but with a new focus on creating systems that could function effectively under the challenging conditions of military operations. The pharmaceutical industry found itself increasingly oriented toward developing compounds that could address military medical needs. Companies that had previously focused on civilian applications began receiving contracts for research into treatments for battlefield injuries, infectious diseases that might affect troops in various geographic regions, and medical challenges specific to military operations. Research programs that had been oriented toward general public health began to emphasize applications that could enhance military effectiveness or address medical problems specific to military personnel. Medical conferences during this period reflected the changing priorities of the research community, with increasing emphasis on presentations dealing with military medical applications. Researchers shared findings related to aviation medicine, battlefield trauma treatment, and other topics that had direct relevance to military operations. While these presentations maintained the scientific rigor that had always characterized German medical research, the subject matter increasingly reflected the militarization of research priorities that was occurring throughout the medical establishment. The systematic approach to research that had made German medical science so effective proved particularly valuable when applied to military medical challenges. Researchers brought the same methodological rigor to investigations of altitude physiology and trauma treatment that they had previously applied to civilian medical problems. This scientific approach to military medicine promised to give German forces significant advantages in terms of pilot survival, battlefield medical care, and the treatment of injuries that would inevitably occur during military operations. Research into infectious disease treatment took on new dimensions as military planners recognized that disease could pose as great a threat to military effectiveness as enemy action. German researchers investigated methods for preventing and treating diseases that might affect troops deployed in various geographic regions, developing vaccines and treatments that could maintain military effectiveness even in environments where infectious diseases were endemic. These research programs required sophisticated understanding of disease transmission and treatment, building upon the expertise that German medical researchers had developed through years of investigating infectious disease in civilian populations. The culture of collaboration that had characterized German medical research continued during this period of transition, but with an increasing emphasis on coordination between military and civilian research institutions. Researchers working in university laboratories found themselves collaborating with colleagues at military medical facilities, sharing expertise and resources to address research challenges that required the combined efforts of multiple institutions. This collaboration accelerated the pace of research and ensured that discoveries made in one context could quickly be applied to address related problems in other settings. Medical education began to reflect the changing priorities of the research community, with increased emphasis on topics relevant to military medicine. Students learned about aviation physiology, battlefield trauma treatment, and other subjects that prepared them to address medical challenges that might arise during military operations. This educational emphasis ensured that the next generation of German physicians would be well prepared to support military operations while maintaining the scientific rigor that had always characterized German medical training. The research infrastructure that had been developed to support civilian medical research proved remarkably adaptable to military applications. Laboratories that had been designed to investigate basic physiological processes could easily be reconfigured to study the specific physiological challenges faced by military personnel. This adaptability meant that the transition to military-focused research could occur without major disruptions to ongoing research programs or the need for massive investments in new facilities and equipment. Research funding during this period increasingly came from military sources, with government agencies providing support for investigations that could have military applications. Researchers who had previously relied on civilian funding sources found new opportunities for support through military contracts that enabled them to pursue ambitious research programs. This funding allowed for the expansion of research programs and the purchase of advanced equipment that might not have been affordable through traditional civilian funding sources. The emphasis on military applications did not initially compromise the scientific rigor that had always characterized German medical research. Investigations into aviation physiology, trauma treatment, and infectious disease control maintained the same methodological standards that had made German medical research internationally respected. Researchers continued to design carefully controlled experiments, collect data systematically, and analyze results according to established scientific principles, ensuring that their findings would be reliable and reproducible. International collaboration in medical research began to decline during this period, as increasing political tensions made cooperation between German researchers and their colleagues in other countries more difficult. Research programs that had previously involved scientists from multiple countries became increasingly focused on German participants, limiting the international exchange of ideas that had previously enriched German medical research. This isolation meant that German researchers had to rely more heavily on their own resources and expertise, though the strength of the German medical establishment made this transition manageable in the short term. The development of specialized medical equipment designed for military applications became an increasingly important area of research and development. German engineers and medical researchers collaborated to create pressure suits for high-altitude flight, portable medical equipment for battlefield use, and other specialized devices that could enhance military medical capabilities. These development projects required close cooperation between technical experts and medical professionals, resulting in innovations that combined engineering sophistication with medical knowledge. Research into the psychological aspects of military medicine began to receive increased attention as researchers recognized that mental factors could be as important as physical factors in determining military effectiveness. Studies of pilot stress, battlefield psychology, and other mental health issues relevant to military operations became important areas of investigation. These research programs represented an expansion of German medical research into areas that had previously received less attention, but were recognized as crucial for maintaining military effectiveness under the stressful conditions of combat operation. The systematic documentation of research findings continued to be a hallmark of German medical research during this period of transition. Researchers maintained detailed records of their investigations, ensuring that their findings could be reviewed and validated by colleagues. This documentation practice meant that the knowledge gained through military-focused research could be preserved and shared among researchers working on related problems, maximizing the value of the research investments being made by military agencies. Medical research institutions adapted their organizational structures to better serve military research priorities while maintaining their capabilities for basic scientific investigation. Administrative systems were modified to accommodate military contracts and security requirements, while research programs were reorganized to focus more heavily on projects with military applications. These organizational changes enabled research institutions to maintain their scientific capabilities while becoming more effective at addressing the specific research needs of military organizations. The integration of military and civilian medical research created new opportunities for cross-fertilization between different areas of investigation. Researchers working on civilian medical problems found that their expertise was relevant to military medical challenges, while investigations conducted for military purposes often yielded insights that could benefit civilian medical practice. This integration helped ensure that the scientific knowledge being developed through military-focused research could eventually contribute to broader advances in medical understanding. Research into trauma treatment became increasingly sophisticated during this period, as researchers recognized that future military operations would likely produce injuries requiring advanced medical intervention. Studies of wound healing, surgical techniques, and post-trauma rehabilitation were conducted with the goal of developing treatments that could maximize the survival and recovery rates of military personnel injured during combat operations. These investigations required sophisticated understanding of human physiology and healing processes, building upon decades of previous research into trauma treatment. The pharmaceutical research programs that had made German companies world leaders in drug development continued during this period, but with increasing emphasis on medications that could be useful in military contexts. Research into antibiotics, pain management medications, and treatments for specific conditions that might affect military personnel became priority areas for pharmaceutical development. These research programs maintained the scientific rigor that had characterized German pharmaceutical research while addressing the specific needs of military medical organizations. As the transformation of German medical research continued through the mid-1930s, the changes that had begun subtly became increasingly apparent to observers both within Germany and internationally. The medical establishment that had been recognized as the world leader in civilian medical research was evolving into something that served primarily military purposes. This transformation represented a fundamental shift in the role of medical research in German society, with implications that would become fully apparent only as political tensions in Europe continued to escalate and the likelihood of military conflict increased. By 1940, the German medical research establishment had transformed into a massive enterprise focused on solving the complex medical challenges of modern warfare. As military operations expanded across multiple theaters of conflict, German researchers found themselves racing against time to develop medical innovations that could give their forces decisive advantages on the battlefield. The pressure to produce results quickly had accelerated research timelines and pushed investigators to explore new approaches to medical problems that had previously seemed unsolvable. The aviation medicine program had evolved into one of the most sophisticated research efforts in the world, with German scientists pushing the boundaries of human physiological understanding in their quest to enable pilots to fly higher, faster, and longer than ever before. Research facilities equipped with advanced pressure chambers and centrifuges conducted systematic investigations into the effects of extreme altitude, rapid acceleration, and prolonged flight on pilot performance and survival. These studies required volunteers to subject themselves to conditions that simulated the most extreme environments that pilots might encounter, generating data that would prove crucial for developing life support systems and operational procedures. The research conducted by Theodor Benzinger at the Aeromedical Laboratory in Rechlin represented the pinnacle of German aviation medicine research during this period. Benzinger, a pilot physician who had trained at some of Germany's most prestigious medical institutions, conducted pioneering studies of rapid decompression and high-altitude physiology that pushed the limits of human survival in extreme conditions. His research involved self-experimentation at altitudes up to 19,000 meters, generating data about human physiological responses to conditions that no previous researcher had systematically studied. The equipment developed for these aviation medicine studies represented remarkable achievements in medical engineering, combining sophisticated mechanical systems with advanced physiological monitoring capabilities. Pressure chambers could simulate altitudes far beyond anything that aircraft had previously achieved, while centrifuges generated acceleration forces that exceeded anything pilots had experienced in actual flight. The data collected using this equipment provided unprecedented insights into human physiological limits and the support systems needed to enable survival and performance under extreme conditions. Blood plasma research had emerged as another area where German scientists were making remarkable progress in developing solutions to battlefield medical challenges. The recognition that blood loss represented the primary cause of death from battlefield injuries had focused research attention on developing methods for rapid blood replacement that could be implemented under field conditions. German researchers investigated various approaches to blood preservation and transfusion, seeking methods that would be effective even in situations where traditional medical facilities were not available. The development of dried blood plasma represented one of the most significant medical innovations of this period, with German researchers building upon earlier discoveries to create a product that could be stored for extended periods without refrigeration and reconstituted quickly when needed for transfusion. This innovation addressed one of the most challenging aspects of battlefield medicine, providing a way to deliver life-saving blood products to wounded personnel, even in remote locations where traditional blood banking was impossible. Research into the physiological effects of various environmental stresses became increasingly sophisticated as researchers sought to understand how human performance could be maintained under the extreme conditions of modern warfare. Studies of temperature extremes, dehydration, fatigue, and other stresses that might affect military personnel were conducted with the goal of developing countermeasures that could maintain effectiveness even under the most challenging conditions. These investigations required careful experimental design to isolate the effects of individual stresses while maintaining the safety of research participants. The pharmaceutical research programs that had been initiated earlier in the decade began producing results that promised to revolutionize the treatment of battlefield injuries and diseases. German companies had developed new approaches to antibiotic production and were investigating compounds that could treat infections more effectively than any previously available medications. While Germany lagged behind Allied efforts in penicillin production, German researchers were exploring alternative approaches to antimicrobial therapy that showed considerable promise for treating battlefield infections. Medical equipment development became an increasingly important aspect of German military medical research, with engineers and physicians collaborating to create devices that could function effectively under battlefield conditions. Portable surgical equipment, field-deployable diagnostic devices, and lightweight life support systems were developed to meet the specific needs of military medical operations. These development projects required innovative approaches to medical technology design, combining medical functionality with the durability and portability required for military applications. The research into wound treatment and trauma surgery became increasingly sophisticated as researchers sought to develop techniques that could maximize survival rates from battlefield injuries. Studies of surgical procedures, wound cleaning and closure methods, and post-operative care were conducted with the goal of creating treatment protocols that could be implemented effectively even under challenging field conditions. These investigations built upon decades of surgical research, but with a new focus on procedures that could be performed quickly and effectively by medical personnel with limited resources. Research collaboration between military and civilian medical institutions had become highly organized by this period, with systematic coordination of research efforts to avoid duplication and maximize the value of research investments. Medical research councils coordinated studies across multiple institutions, ensuring that research findings were shared quickly among investigators working on related problems. This coordination accelerated the pace of discovery and enabled researchers to build upon each other's findings more effectively than would have been possible through independent research efforts. The development of specialized training programs for military medical personnel became an important aspect of translating research findings into operational capabilities. Medical schools modified their curricula to ensure that graduates were prepared to apply the latest research findings in military medical settings. Training programs for military medical technicians and field medics incorporated the most current knowledge about trauma treatment, disease prevention, and medical equipment operation, ensuring that research discoveries could be implemented effectively at the operational level. International intelligence efforts to understand German medical research capabilities had become increasingly active during this period, with Allied intelligence services working to assess the potential military implications of German medical innovations. The recognition that medical capabilities could significantly influence military effectiveness had made medical research a target for intelligence collection efforts. This intelligence interest reflected the broader understanding that scientific and technical superiority could be decisive factors in modern warfare. The research into human physiological limits continued to push boundaries as investigators sought to understand the extreme conditions under which military personnel might be required to operate. Studies of survival in extreme environments, tolerance to various forms of stress, and recovery from injuries were conducted to develop guidelines for military operations and medical treatment. These investigations required sophisticated experimental designs that could generate reliable data about human capabilities while maintaining acceptable levels of risk for research participants. Medical logistics research had become an increasingly important area of investigation as military planners recognized that the effectiveness of medical innovations would depend heavily on the ability to deliver medical supplies and services to personnel in the field. Studies of medical supply preservation, transportation of medical equipment, and organization of field medical facilities were conducted to ensure that medical innovations could be implemented effectively during actual military operations. These logistic studies were essential for translating laboratory discoveries into operational capabilities that could influence military outcomes. The research into disease prevention and treatment took on new urgency as German forces operated in geographic regions where infectious diseases posed significant threats to military effectiveness. Studies of disease transmission, vaccine development and treatment of tropical diseases became important areas of investigation. German researchers investigated methods for protecting military personnel from diseases they might encounter in various theaters of operation, developing preventive measures and treatments that could maintain military effectiveness even in environments where infectious diseases were endemic. Research documentation and communication systems had evolved to accommodate the rapid pace of discovery and the need to share information quickly among researchers working on related problems. Scientific journals focused on military medical applications were established to facilitate communication among investigators. Conference systems were organized to enable researchers to present findings quickly to colleagues who could apply them to related research problems or operational applications. The development of medical research ethics and safety protocols became an important consideration as research activities expanded and investigations pushed into new areas of human physiological study. Research institutions developed guidelines for conducting studies involving human participants, establishing procedures designed to minimize risks while enabling the collection of data needed to advance medical knowledge. These protocols represented an evolution of medical research practices to accommodate the increased scope and intensity of research activities while maintaining acceptable standards for participant safety. Quality control systems for medical research had become increasingly sophisticated as the military importance of research findings made accuracy and reliability crucial considerations. Research institutions implemented procedures for validating experimental findings and ensuring that research results were reproducible. These quality control measures were essential for maintaining confidence in research findings that might influence critical military medical decisions. The training of medical researchers had evolved to accommodate the changing demands of military-focused medical research, with educational programs modified to ensure that new investigators were prepared to contribute effectively to high-priority research efforts. Graduate programs in medical research incorporated military medical applications into their curricula, while maintaining the rigorous scientific training that had always characterized German medical education. This educational approach ensured that the research community would continue to grow and develop the expertise needed to address increasingly complex medical challenges. Research facility security became an important consideration as the military significance of medical research made research findings potential targets for intelligence collection efforts. Institutions implemented security procedures to protect sensitive research information while maintaining the collaborative environment needed for effective scientific investigation. These security measures represented a balance between the need to protect valuable research information and the requirement for scientific collaboration and communication. The integration of engineering and medical expertise had become increasingly sophisticated as research projects required close collaboration between technical specialists and medical professionals. Joint research teams, combining medical knowledge with engineering capabilities, were organized to address complex problems that required expertise from multiple disciplines. These interdisciplinary teams were particularly important for developing medical equipment and life support systems that required both medical understanding and technical innovation. As 1942 approached, the German medical research establishment had become a massive enterprise focused on solving the medical challenges of modern warfare through systematic scientific investigation. The research infrastructure that had been built over decades of civilian medical research had been successfully adapted to address military medical needs. The stage was set for research efforts that would push the boundaries of medical knowledge and human understanding in ways that would have profound implications for both military operations and the future of medical science. The year 1942 marked a critical turning point in the trajectory of German medical research, as the initial successes of military operations gave way to the harsh realities of prolonged conflict across multiple theaters of war. German medical researchers found themselves confronting challenges that exceeded anything they had previously encountered, as the scale and intensity of military operations created medical problems that demanded immediate solutions regardless of traditional research timelines or methodological considerations. The Eastern Front had become a medical nightmare that challenged every assumption German researchers had made about battlefield medicine and human survival in extreme conditions. The vast distances, extreme weather, and intensity of combat operations created medical challenges that existing research had not anticipated. German medical personnel found themselves treating injuries and conditions that textbooks had never described, while operating under conditions that made traditional medical procedures nearly impossible to implement effectively. Infection control had emerged as one of the most critical challenges facing German military medical services, as traditional approaches to preventing and treating infected wounds proved inadequate under field conditions. Gas gangrene and other serious bacterial infections were claiming the lives of soldiers who survived their initial injuries, creating an urgent need for new approaches to antimicrobial treatment. German researchers accelerated their investigations into sulfanilamide and other antibacterial compounds, conducting studies designed to determine the most effective methods for preventing and treating serious wound infections. The research conducted at Ravensbrück concentration camp by Professor Karl Gebhardt and his team represented an attempt to address the gas gangrene problem through systematic investigation of sulfanilamide effectiveness under controlled conditions. Gebhardt, who served as the leading orthopedic surgeon in Germany and held prestigious academic appointments, organized studies designed to determine whether sulfanilamide treatment could prevent gas gangrene infections in wounds that had been deliberately contaminated with bacteria. These studies were presented as essential research needed to develop treatment protocols that could save the lives of German soldiers suffering from infected wounds. The experimental protocols developed for these infection studies reflected the influence of military urgency on research methodology, as traditional approaches to medical research were modified to generate results more quickly than would have been possible using conventional procedures. Researchers created standardized wound infections in research participants and then tested various treatment approaches to determine which methods were most effective for preventing the spread of infection. The data collected through these studies was intended to provide clear guidance for military medical personnel treating similar infections under field conditions. Blood preservation research had become increasingly urgent as military medical services struggled to provide adequate blood supplies for treating casualties in remote locations. German researchers investigated multiple approaches to extending the shelf life of blood products and developing portable transfusion systems that could function effectively under battlefield conditions. These investigations required extensive testing to ensure that preserved blood products retained their effectiveness while remaining safe for transfusion to wounded personnel. Aviation medicine research reached new levels of sophistication as German Air Force operations expanded to include high-altitude reconnaissance flights and long-range bombing missions that pushed pilot endurance to its limits. Research facilities conducted studies of pilot performance under extreme conditions, investigating the physiological factors that limited flight duration and effectiveness. These studies generated data about human performance limits that would prove valuable for developing operational procedures and life support equipment for extended flight operations. The development of medical equipment for extreme environments became a critical priority as German forces operated in geographic regions ranging from Arctic conditions to tropical environments. Research teams investigated the medical challenges posed by extreme temperatures, humidity, altitude, and other environmental factors that could affect military effectiveness. These investigations required sophisticated understanding of human physiology and environmental adaptation, building upon decades of previous research while addressing the specific requirements of military operations. Pharmaceutical research programs had been expanded dramatically to address the urgent need for medications that could treat conditions encountered during military operations. German companies investigated compounds for treating everything from tropical diseases to altitude sickness, seeking medications that could maintain military effectiveness even under challenging environmental conditions. These research programs operated under accelerated timelines that compressed normal drug development processes into periods measured in months rather than years. Research into human performance under stress had become increasingly important as military operations demanded sustained performance under conditions that exceeded normal human limitations. Studies of fatigue, sleep deprivation, nutrition, and psychological stress were conducted to understand how military effectiveness could be maintained during prolonged operations. These investigations required careful experimental design to isolate the effects of individual stressors while generating data that could be applied to improve operational procedures and personnel support systems. The coordination between medical research institutions had become highly systematized to ensure that research efforts addressed the most critical military medical needs without unnecessary duplication. Research councils established priorities for investigation and coordinated studies across multiple institutions to maximize the value of limited research resources. This coordination enabled researchers to focus their efforts on the most important problems while ensuring that research findings were shared quickly among institutions working on related challenges. Medical training programs had been modified extensively to incorporate the latest research findings and prepare medical personnel for the challenging conditions they would encounter during military operations. Training curricula emphasized practical skills needed for battlefield medicine while incorporating the most current knowledge about trauma treatment, disease prevention, and medical equipment operation. These training programs were essential for ensuring that research discoveries could be translated into improved medical care for military personnel. International medical intelligence activities had intensified as both German and Allied researchers recognized the strategic importance of medical capabilities. German intelligence services worked to understand Allied medical research capabilities, while protecting information about German medical innovations from foreign intelligence collection efforts. This intelligence competition reflected the broader understanding that medical superiority could influence military outcomes as significantly as superiority in weapons or tactics. Research into tissue regeneration and wound healing had become increasingly sophisticated as researchers sought to develop treatments that could accelerate recovery from battlefield injuries. Studies of bone healing, nerve regeneration, and tissue transplantation were conducted with the goal of developing procedures that could restore function to personnel who had suffered serious injuries. These investigations required advanced understanding of human physiology and healing processes, representing some of the most sophisticated medical research being conducted anywhere in the world. The development of field medical procedures had become a critical area of investigation, as traditional hospital-based medical practices proved inadequate for treating casualties under battlefield conditions. Researchers developed simplified surgical procedures that could be performed effectively with limited equipment and under challenging environmental conditions. These procedure development efforts required extensive testing to ensure that simplified approaches maintained acceptable levels of effectiveness while being practical to implement under field conditions. Research documentation systems had evolved to accommodate the need for rapid communication of findings among researchers and medical personnel. Standardized reporting formats were developed to ensure that research results could be communicated quickly and accurately to personnel who needed to apply them in operational settings. These documentation systems were essential for translating research discoveries into operational capabilities that could influence military medical outcomes. Quality assurance programs for medical research had become increasingly rigorous as the military importance of research findings made accuracy and reliability critical considerations. Research institutions implemented multiple levels of review for experimental findings to ensure that results were valid and reproducible before they were applied in operational settings. These quality assurance measures were necessary to maintain confidence in research results that might influence life and death medical decisions. The development of specialized medical units for different types of operations had become an important application of medical research findings. Research data about human performance under various conditions was used to design medical support systems tailored to specific types of military operations. These specialized medical units incorporated the latest research findings about environmental physiology, trauma treatment, and equipment design to provide optimal medical support for different types of military activities. Research into the psychological aspects of medical treatment had become increasingly important as researchers recognized that mental factors could significantly influence recovery rates and treatment effectiveness. Studies of pain management, psychological support for injured personnel, and methods for maintaining morale under challenging conditions were conducted to improve overall treatment outcomes. These investigations represented an expansion of medical research into areas that had previously received less systematic attention but were recognized as crucial for maximizing the effectiveness of medical interventions. The integration of medical research with operational planning had become increasingly sophisticated as military leaders recognized the importance of medical considerations in strategic and tactical decision-making. Medical research findings about human performance limits, environmental challenges, and treatment capabilities were incorporated into operational planning processes to ensure that military operations could be sustained effectively. This integration represented a fundamental change in military planning that reflected the growing understanding of medical factors as determinants of military effectiveness. Research facility security had become increasingly sophisticated as the strategic importance of medical research made research information a target for intelligence collection efforts. Institutions implemented comprehensive security programs that protected sensitive research information while maintaining the collaborative environment necessary for effective scientific investigation. These security measures reflected the broader militarization of research activities and the recognition that medical knowledge had become a strategic resource that required protection. Medical equipment standardization had become an important consideration as the diversity of medical devices and procedures made training and logistics increasingly complex. Research efforts were directed toward developing standardized equipment and procedures that could be used effectively across different types of medical situations. This standardization was essential for ensuring that medical personnel could operate effectively, regardless of their specific assignment or the particular conditions they encountered. The development of medical research ethics guidelines had become increasingly important as research activities expanded and investigations pushed into new areas of human physiological study. Research institutions developed comprehensive protocols for conducting studies involving human participants, establishing procedures designed to minimize risks while enabling the collection of data needed to advance medical knowledge. These ethical guidelines represented an attempt to balance the urgent need for medical research with traditional medical principles about patient care and research participant safety. As 1943 approached, the German medical research establishment found itself at a crossroads where traditional scientific principles increasingly came into conflict with military urgency and political pressures. The research infrastructure that had been developed over decades of civilian medical research was being pushed to its limits by the demands of supporting military operations on an unprecedented scale. The decisions made during this critical period would determine not only the future direction of German medical research, but also its ultimate legacy in the history of medical science. As the war entered its final phases in 1944 and 1945, the German medical research establishment found itself confronting the consequences of choices made under the pressure of military necessity and political ideology. What had begun as legitimate scientific inquiry into military medical challenges had evolved into something far more complex and troubling, with implications that would reverberate through the medical community for generations to come. The doctor's trial at Nuremberg in 1946 brought international scrutiny to bear on the activities of German medical researchers during the war years, exposing practices that shocked the international medical community and fundamentally challenged assumptions about the relationship between scientific research and medical ethics. The trial proceedings revealed a medical establishment that had gradually abandoned traditional principles of medical practice in pursuit of research goals that served military and political rather than healing purposes. The testimony presented during the doctor's trial provided detailed documentation of research activities that had been conducted throughout the German medical system during the war years. Witnesses described systematic studies that had been conducted under the guise of military medical research, but had involved procedures that violated fundamental principles of medical ethics and human dignity. The trial proceedings revealed the extent to which traditional medical research safeguards had been abandoned under the pressure of military necessity and political ideology. Karl Gebhardt, who had been one of Germany's most distinguished orthopedic surgeons and had held prestigious academic appointments at leading medical institutions, found himself defending research activities that had resulted in the deaths of research participants. His testimony revealed the complex reasoning that had led respected medical professionals to conduct studies that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The trial proceedings documented how academic medical leaders had justified research procedures that violated basic principles of medical ethics and patient care. The international medical community's response to the revelations from the doctor's trial reflected the profound shock that accompanied recognition of how dramatically German medical research had departed from accepted standards of medical practice. Medical organizations around the world implemented new ethical guidelines and oversight procedures designed to prevent similar departures from medical ethics in future research activities. The trial proceedings served as a catalyst for fundamental reforms in medical research practices that would influence the development of medical ethics for decades to come. The Nuremberg Code, which emerged from the doctor's trial proceedings, established fundamental principles for medical research involving human participants that would become the foundation for modern medical research ethics. The code specified requirements for informed consent, voluntary participation, and risk-benefit assessment that were designed to prevent the kind of research abuses that had been documented during the trial. These principles represented a fundamental shift in thinking about the relationship between medical research and human rights. The scientific value of the research that had been conducted under the auspices of military medical research programs became a subject of intense debate within the international medical community. While some studies had generated data about human physiology under extreme conditions that was scientifically valid, the methods used to obtain this data had violated fundamental principles of medical ethics. The debate about whether scientifically valid information obtained through unethical means could legitimately be used for beneficial purposes would continue for decades. The broader German medical establishment struggled to come to terms with its complicity in research activities that had violated medical ethics and contributed to human suffering on a massive scale. Medical institutions that had previously been centers of healing and scientific advancement found themselves confronting their role in activities that contradicted the fundamental principles of medical practice. The process of acknowledging and addressing this complicity would prove to be a long and difficult journey for the German medical community. The documentation of medical research activities that emerged during the post-war investigations revealed the systematic nature of the transformation that had occurred within German medical research. What had initially appeared to be isolated incidents of unethical research proved to be part of a comprehensive program that had involved hundreds of medical professionals and had been supported by the highest levels of medical and political leadership. The scope of the transformation shocked even those who had been aware that problems existed within the German medical system. Allied intelligence investigations after the war revealed the extent to which German medical research had been integrated with military planning and operations. Research findings about human performance under extreme conditions, medical treatment of battlefield injuries, and pharmaceutical development had been systematically incorporated into military medical doctrine and operational procedures. These investigations documented how medical research had been transformed from a civilian scientific enterprise into a component of military strategy. The fate of German medical researchers after the war varied widely depending on their level of involvement in unethical research activities and their value to post-war reconstruction efforts. Some researchers who had conducted legitimate medical research were recruited by Allied powers to continue their work in new contexts. Others, who had been directly involved in unethical research, faced criminal prosecution or professional sanctions that effectively ended their medical careers. Theodor Benzinger, whose aviation medicine research had represented some of the most scientifically rigorous investigations conducted during the war years, was recruited by the United States through Operation Paperclip to continue his research at American medical institutions. His subsequent career at the Naval Medical Research Institute demonstrated that legitimate scientific research could be separated from the broader pattern of unethical research that had characterized much of the German medical research program during the war years. The legitimate medical advances that had been made during the war years were gradually separated from the unethical research activities and incorporated into post-war medical practice. Advances in aviation medicine, trauma surgery, blood preservation, and pharmaceutical development that had been achieved through ethical research methods continued to contribute to medical progress. These legitimate advances demonstrated that significant medical progress could be achieved without compromising ethical principles. The reconstruction of German medical institutions after the war required fundamental reforms in research practices, administrative structures, and ethical oversight systems. Medical schools implemented new curricula that emphasized medical ethics and professional responsibility, while research institutions established oversight committees designed to prevent future ethical violations. These reforms represented an attempt to restore the credibility and integrity of German medical research, while ensuring that the mistakes of the war years would not be repeated. International cooperation in medical research, which had been severely limited during the war years, gradually resumed as reformed German medical institutions demonstrated their commitment to ethical research practices. The exchange of scientific information and collaborative research projects that had been characteristic of pre-war medical research slowly returned, though with enhanced emphasis on ethical oversight and professional responsibility. This renewed cooperation was essential for the continued advancement of medical knowledge and the restoration of trust in medical research. The development of international standards for medical research ethics was accelerated by the lessons learned from the German medical research program during the war years. Organizations such as the World Medical Association developed comprehensive guidelines for medical research that incorporated the principles established by the Nuremberg Code while addressing the practical challenges of conducting ethical research in various cultural and institutional contexts. These international standards provided a framework for ethical medical research that would guide scientific investigation for decades to come. Medical education systems around the world incorporated lessons from the German experience into their curricula, ensuring that future physicians and medical researchers would be aware of the ethical challenges that could arise when medical research was conducted under political pressure or without adequate oversight. These educational reforms emphasized the importance of maintaining ethical principles, even under difficult circumstances, and provided training in recognizing and addressing ethical challenges. The legal frameworks governing medical research were strengthened in many countries as a direct result of the revelations from the doctor's trial and related investigations. New laws and regulations established criminal penalties for conducting unethical medical research, while providing legal protections for research participants and oversight mechanisms to ensure compliance with ethical standards. These legal reforms represented a recognition that ethical medical research required not only professional self-regulation, but also legal enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance with ethical standards. These legal reforms represented a recognition that ethical medical research required not only professional self-regulation, but also legal enforcement of ethical standards to protect vulnerable populations from exploitation in research settings. The psychiatric profession underwent particular scrutiny in the post-war period as investigators revealed the extensive involvement of mental health professionals in programs that had violated fundamental principles of medical practice. The participation of psychiatrists in programs targeting individuals with mental illness represented a profound betrayal of professional responsibilities that required comprehensive reforms in psychiatric education and practice. These reforms established new standards for psychiatric research and treatment that emphasized patient rights and professional accountability. The pharmaceutical industry faced significant challenges in rebuilding credibility after revelations about the extent to which major companies had supported unethical research programs during the war years. Companies like IG Farben, which had been closely connected to concentration camp operations and unethical research activities, were broken up and reformed with new ethical guidelines and oversight mechanisms. These reforms established precedents for pharmaceutical industry accountability that would influence industry regulation for decades to come. The impact on medical education systems extended far beyond Germany, as institutions around the world recognized the need to strengthen ethical training for medical professionals. Medical schools implemented comprehensive ethics curricula that addressed not only individual medical practice, but also the responsibilities of medical professionals in research and public health contexts. These educational reforms emphasize the importance of maintaining professional integrity even under political pressure or institutional expectations that might compromise ethical standards. The development of international medical research collaboration mechanisms incorporated lessons learned from the German experience, establishing protocols for ethical oversight of international research projects and ensuring that research conducted in collaboration between institutions would meet the highest ethical standards, regardless of the political or cultural context in which the research occurred. These collaborative frameworks provided models for ethical international research cooperation that would prove essential for addressing global health challenges in subsequent decades. Medical professional organizations implemented comprehensive reforms in their codes of ethics and disciplinary procedures to address the challenges revealed by the German experience. Professional societies established mechanisms for investigating ethical violations and imposing sanctions on members who failed to maintain ethical standards in their research or clinical practice. These reforms strengthened professional accountability and provided clearer guidance for medical professionals facing ethical challenges in their work. The preservation of scientific knowledge obtained through unethical means became a contentious issue that generated extensive debate within the medical community. While some argued that scientifically valid information should not be discarded regardless of how it was obtained, others maintained that using such information would validate unethical research practices and dishonor the victims of unethical research. This debate established important precedents for addressing ethical challenges in the use of scientific information obtained through questionable means. The establishment of institutional review boards and ethics committees became standard practice in medical research institutions around the world as a direct result of lessons learned from the German experience. These oversight mechanisms were designed to evaluate research proposals before implementation, to ensure that they met ethical standards and protected the rights and welfare of research participants. The development of these oversight systems represented a fundamental change in medical research practice that would become essential for maintaining public trust in medical research. As we reach the conclusion of this complex and troubling chapter in medical history, the legacy of German medical research during World War II continues to reverberate through modern medical practice and research ethics. The transformation of what had been the world's leading medical research establishment into something that violated fundamental principles of healing and human dignity serves as a permanent reminder of the vigilance required to maintain ethical standards in medical research and practice. The Nuremberg Code, which emerged directly from the proceedings that examined German medical research practices during the war, established principles that have become the foundation for modern research ethics worldwide. The requirements for informed consent, voluntary participation, and careful assessment of risks and benefits that were codified in this document continue to guide medical research more than 7 decades later, serving as a testament to the enduring importance of the lessons learned from this dark period in medical history. The scientific advances that emerged from legitimate German medical research during this period, particularly in fields such as aviation medicine and pharmaceutical development, continued to contribute to medical progress in the post-war era. The work of researchers like Theodor Benzinger, whose ethical approach to aviation medicine research provided valuable insights into human physiology under extreme conditions, demonstrated that significant scientific progress could be achieved without compromising ethical principles. Modern medical education has been fundamentally shaped by the recognition that technical competence must be accompanied by unwavering commitment to ethical principles. Medical schools around the world now require comprehensive training in research ethics and professional responsibility, ensuring that future physicians and researchers understand not only the scientific methods of their profession, but also the moral obligations that come with the privilege of conducting research on human beings. The international frameworks for medical research cooperation that developed in the decades following World War II incorporated explicit protections for research participants and mechanisms for ethical oversight that reflect the lessons learned from the German experience. These frameworks have proven essential for conducting the kind of collaborative international research needed to address global health challenges while maintaining the highest ethical standards. The ongoing debate about the use of scientific information obtained through unethical means continues to challenge the medical community, requiring careful consideration of how to balance the potential benefits of scientific knowledge against the moral imperative to honor the dignity of those who suffered to generate that knowledge. This debate serves as a continuing reminder of the complex ethical challenges that can arise when scientific inquiry occurs without adequate ethical oversight. The institutional mechanisms that have been developed to ensure ethical conduct in medical research, including institutional review boards, ethics committees, and professional oversight organizations, represent the medical community's commitment to preventing future occurrences of the kind of ethical violations that characterized German medical research during World War II. These mechanisms require constant vigilance and periodic renewal to ensure that they remain effective in protecting research participants and maintaining public trust in medical research. Perhaps most importantly, the legacy of this period serves as a permanent reminder that the medical profession's commitment to healing and human dignity must never be subordinated to political, military, or ideological goals. The transformation of German medicine during World War II demonstrates how quickly and completely medical institutions can lose their way when they abandon their fundamental commitment to ethical practice in pursuit of other objectives. As we face contemporary challenges in medical research and practice, from global pandemics to emerging biotechnologies, the lessons learned from this dark chapter in medical history remain as relevant as ever. The eternal vigilance required to maintain ethical standards in medicine is not merely a professional obligation, but a fundamental requirement for preserving the trust and dignity that make medical practice possible. The memory of those who suffered as a result of unethical medical research serves as a constant reminder of the human cost when medical practice abandons its ethical foundation. Their sacrifice has contributed to the development of ethical frameworks that have protected countless individuals in subsequent decades, ensuring that their suffering was not in vain, but rather contributed to the development of principles that continue to guide medical practice toward its highest aspirations of healing and human dignity. In conclusion, while the German medical research program during World War II represents one of the darkest chapters in the history of medicine, the lessons learned from this period have fundamentally strengthened the ethical foundations of modern medical practice. The vigilance required to maintain these ethical standards is not a burden, but rather the essence of what it means to practice medicine in service of humanity's highest values and aspirations. This documentary has been created to honor the memory of those who suffered and to ensure that the lessons learned from this tragic period continue to guide medical practice toward its highest ethical aspirations. We encourage viewers to reflect on these important lessons and to remain vigilant in protecting the ethical foundations of medical research and practice.